Say something out loud right now. Anything. A word, a sentence, whatever comes to mind, go ahead. Okay. Whatever you just said, however casual, however automatic it felt, that sound coming out of your mouth is the end product of one of the strangest, slowest, most mysterious transformations in the entire history of life on Earth. And the wildest part? For most of the time humans have existed, nobody could do what you just did. Not one person, not one single sentence ever spoken anywhere on the planet. So what happened? The answer involves grunting apes, exploding brains, a bone in your throat that shouldn't exist, gossip, tool making, a gene that isn't actually the language gene, and a silence that lasted for millions of years before it suddenly, mysteriously broke. If you trace the human family tree back far enough, every single one of your ancestors, no matter where you're from today, went through a period with no language at all. Not a simpler language, not a few basic words. Nothing. No nouns, no verbs, no sentences, no grammar. Just sound, gesture, and silence. Now think about that. Every conversation you've ever had, every song, every argument, every I love you, every book, every joke, every piece of writing, and every civilization that has ever existed, all of it traces back to a starting point where none of that existed yet. At some point, something changed, and that change was so powerful, it rewired the entire trajectory of our species. So, before we get to what actually happened, we need to understand something most people never think about. What language actually is, biologically speaking. Because most people treat language like it's just talking, like it's a soft cultural thing, something humans invented the way we invented calendars or currency. But language isn't just talking. It's an entire biological system. Dozens of moving parts working together. Lungs pushing air, a larynx shaping it into sound, a tongue and lips sculpting that sound into distinct units. And underneath all of it, a brain running grammar, memory, and abstraction in real time, fast enough to keep up with a conversation. Language is arguably the most complex piece of biological machinery your body runs, and you use it without thinking, the same way you don't think about your heartbeat. One of the first things you need to understand is that before words, communication already existed. Early hominins weren't silent statues wandering the savannah. They had calls, grunts, screams, warning barks, and almost certainly a rich vocabulary of gesture. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, do this today. They have distinct alarm calls for different predators. A different call for leopard than for eagle. That's information. That's communication. But it isn't language. It's fixed. It's automatic. A chimp can't rearrange those calls to make a new sentence. It can't say the leopard that was here yesterday might come back tomorrow. It's stuck broadcasting only what evolution hardwired it to broadcast. And that is the wall our ancestors were stuck behind for millions of years. Here's where it gets interesting, because language required something else to happen first. Something physical. Something almost accidental. Around 2 million years ago, give or take, something strange started happening to the hominin throat. A small horseshoe-shaped bone called the hyoid bone began shifting position, and the larynx, the voice box, began descending lower in the throat than in any other primate. In most animals, the larynx sits high, which lets them breathe and swallow at the same time without choking. In humans, it sits low, which is bizarre because it actually increases the risk of choking on food. Evolution generally does not trade away survival for nothing. So why would it make that trade? The answer is that a lowered larynx creates a longer vocal tract, and a longer vocal tract can produce a vastly wider range of distinct vowel sounds. In other words, our ancestors traded a small increase in choking risk for the ability to make dramatically more complex sounds. That's not a coincidence. That's evolution quietly assembling the hardware for speech, piece by piece, long before anyone was actually speaking. But hardware alone isn't language. You can have the perfect instrument and still have nothing to play on it. The other half of the puzzle isn't in the throat, it's in the brain. Around this same rough window, hominin brains were undergoing an explosive, almost unbelievable expansion. Early Homo species had brains roughly a third the size of modern humans. By the time Homo sapiens showed up, brain size had nearly tripled, and a huge amount of that growth happened in regions tied directly to sequencing, planning, and abstract thought. The exact mental toolkit you need to string sounds together into sentences that follow rules. There's a specific region called Broca's area, and there's another called Wernicke's area. And damage to either one in a modern human can devastate a person's ability to produce or understand language, even though their intelligence in every other way stays intact. That tells you something important. Language isn't just smart people talking. It's a specific dedicated piece of neural architecture, and building that architecture took an enormous evolutionary investment. So now we have two things happening in parallel over roughly 2 million years. A vocal tract slowly reshaping itself into an instrument capable of complex sound, and a brain slowly reshaping itself into a processor capable of complex structure. Neither one is language yet, But together, they're building the stage the moment language finally walks onto it. Here's where things get genuinely strange though, because unlike bones, unlike skin, unlike almost anything else we've talked about on this channel, language does not fossilize. You cannot dig up a sentence. There is no artifact in the ground that says, here is proof this population used full grammar and this one didn't. Scientists have to reconstruct the story from indirect evidence, brain endocasts, throat anatomy, tool complexity, and genetics. And that means the exact moment language switched on is one of the most fiercely debated questions in all of science. Estimates range from as early as 1.5 to 2 million years ago, all the way to as recent as 50,000 to 100,000 years ago. That is an enormous range of uncertainty, and honestly, that gap alone should tell you something. Even the experts don't fully agree on when humans started talking. One of the strongest genetic clues we do have involves a gene called FOXP. For a while, headlines nicknamed it the language gene. That's misleading, but the real story is still fascinating. Families with a mutated version of FOXP have severe difficulty with the fine motor control needed to form words. They also struggle with grammar itself. So this gene clearly plays some role in the language system. But here's the catch. FOXP2 isn't unique to humans. Chimpanzees have a version of it. Mice have a version of it. What's different is a handful of small mutations in the human version. Those mutations appear to have spread through our species sometime in roughly the last few 100,000 years. And Neanderthals, it turns out, carried that same human-like version of the gene, which raises one of the most mind-bending questions in the field. Did Neanderthals talk? For a long time, the assumption was no. Neanderthals were painted as grunting brutes with no real communication beyond basic calls. Recent research has completely dismantled that picture. Neanderthal ear bones, when reconstructed, show they were tuned to hear the same frequency range humans use for speech. Their hyoid bone is essentially identical to ours. And archaeological sites show evidence of symbolic behavior, jewelry, pigment use, deliberate burial, the kind of behavior that strongly implies shared meaning, and shared meaning is very hard to coordinate without some form of language. So the picture that's emerging isn't humans invented language and Neanderthals didn't. It's something closer to language, or at least the deep roots of it, may go back further than Homo sapiens itself, further back than our species' own origin. So let's pause for a second and take stock of where we are. We've got a throat that slowly reshaped itself into an instrument built for complex sound. We've got a brain that slowly reshaped itself into a processor built for complex structure. Two separate biological systems, both under construction for millions of years. But neither one actually tells us why. Having the hardware isn't the same as knowing what pushed our ancestors to actually use it. Now here's the twist that almost nobody expects when they first hear it. If language is this incredible survival tool, this is where you'd assume the story is about hunting, coordinating an ambush on a mammoth, warning your group about a predator, and sure, those uses mattered. But a growing number of researchers argue the real driving pressure behind complex language wasn't hunting at all. It was something far more social, far pettier, far more human. Gossip. Here's the logic. As hominin groups grew larger, tracking who could be trusted, who broke an alliance, who cheated, who helped, who owed what to whom, became a massive cognitive burden. Grooming, which is how primates like chimpanzees maintain social bonds, physically touching each other one at a time, doesn't scale. You can only groom one individual at a time, and there are only so many hours in a day. But language scales instantly. You can update an entire group's social knowledge simultaneously, out loud, in minutes. Under this theory, language wasn't primarily a hunting tool. It was a social technology, a way to hold together groups far larger than grooming alone could manage, by letting information about trust, reputation, and reciprocity spread at the speed of sound instead of the speed of touch. Which means the ability that lets you write a novel, argue about a movie plot, or explain a complicated theory in a video like this, one may have originally evolved so your ancestors could talk about each other behind their backs. If this kind of deep history mystery is your thing, this channel is basically built on unpacking one of these questions every video, so there's more like it waiting for you here. And once you have full grammar, full syntax, a brain and a throat both capable of producing and processing structured sentences, something else becomes possible that changes everything downstream. Culture can now be transmitted with precision. Before language, knowledge had to be shown, physically demonstrated, copied by watching. After language, knowledge could be told. A parent could explain in words exactly how to make a tool, exactly where danger lay, exactly what happened to the last person who tried something and failed, without that lesson having to be relearned physically by every single generation. Language turned individual experience into shareable, cumulative knowledge. That single shift may be the actual foundation underneath everything else we consider civilization. Here's something adjacent that's almost as mind-bending as the main story. Spoken language may stretch back hundreds of thousands, maybe over 1 million years. Written language does not. Writing, the ability to lock language onto a physical surface so it survives beyond the moment it's spoken, only appears around 5 to 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. In the full multi-hundred-thousand-year history of spoken human language, writing has existed for a sliver, a rounding error, less than 2% of the time humans have been talking to each other. Every ancient philosopher, every early poem, every myth passed down before writing existed survived purely because someone spoke it and someone else remembered it well enough to speak it again. So let's step back and look at the whole picture. Language, the thing that lets you argue, apologize, teach, flirt, negotiate, pray, joke, and lie, isn't some clean invention with a single inventor and a single moment of creation. It's the product of millions of years of overlapping pressure. A throat slowly reshaping itself for sound, a brain slowly reshaping itself for structure, and a species slowly discovering that the fastest way to survive together wasn't strength and it wasn't speed. It was the ability to put a thought into a sound and hand that sound to somebody else. We don't know the first word. We will probably never know the first word. There's no fossil for it, no recording, no witness left alive. But somewhere, at some point, in some small group of hominins none of us will ever be able to name, one individual made a sound, and for the first time in the history of life on this planet, another individual understood exactly what they meant. That sound you made at the start of this video, the one that felt so easy, so automatic, you didn't even think about it, it took nearly 2 million years of throats, reshaping, and brains rewiring before that sound was even possible. Every conversation since has just been an echo of that moment. So, if this made you think differently about the sound you just made without even trying, that's the whole point. Hit like, drop a comment with the weirdest word you know, and subscribe to Greyhead for more stories like this one.